For 3 decades, one man ruled late-night television with wit, charm, and an unshakable calm. Johnny Carson, the silver-haired king of The Tonight Show, was America's nightly ritual. Millions tuned in, not just for the laughter, but for the comfort of his steady presence. He was smooth, unflappable, and always in control. Even when jokes bombed or guests misbehaved, Johnny handled it with that sly grin and an arched eyebrow that said more than a paragraph ever could. To his audience, he was the epitome of composure, untouchable, mysterious, always one step ahead. But behind that perfect posture and polished humor was a man of deep sensitivity. On rare occasions, the mask slipped, the cool veneer cracked, revealing a raw, emotional truth that stunned the millions watching. These were the moments that reminded America that behind the greatest talk show host in history lived a man capable of profound feeling. Today, we revisit the moments that made Johnny Carson cry or come very close. 7 encounters that broke through the wall he spent a lifetime building. If this kind of story touches your heart, if you're someone who cares about truth, responsibility, and speaking up for the voiceless, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who should hear it. Let's get started. 1. Jimmy Stewart's heartfelt poem. It began as a light-hearted interview with an old friend. Jimmy Stewart, the beloved actor with that familiar stammering voice, was one of Carson's favorite guests. By 1981, Stewart was in his 70s, a legend in his own right, but a humble one. He brought along a poem he had written about his dog, Bo. The audience expected a laugh, perhaps a sweet, nostalgic chuckle about man's best friend. Instead, what they got was heartbreak. Stewart's trembling voice carried words that went straight through the heart. He never came to me when I called unless I had a treat, you see. But now I call, and he's not here, just the echoes of my call and me. By the second verse, the studio was silent. You could hear the faint hum of the cameras. Stewart paused, his voice quivering as he read through tears. Carson tried to hold steady, but his eyes gave him away. The corners glistened, and then, the rarest sight of all, tears began to fall. The host, who had seen everything, who had kept his composure through live disasters and celebrity breakdowns, wiped his eyes with a folded handkerchief. When Stewart finished, Carson couldn't speak. He simply reached over and took Jimmy's hand. For a few seconds, the king of late night sat utterly still, visibly shaken. That moment has since become television legend. Not just because it showed Carson crying, but because it revealed something deeper. The friendship between two men who represented an entire generation of grace, restraint, and quiet dignity. In that poem about a dog, Stewart had unknowingly given Carson permission to be vulnerable in front of America. 2. The last goodbye, Carson and Ed McMahon. If Johnny was the king, Ed McMahon was the loyal knight. For 30 years, Ed sat to his right, the booming voice, the perfect setup man, the warm laugh that made every punchline land. When Carson announced his retirement in 1992, everyone knew it would be emotional. But no one was prepared for what happened between those two men on their final night together. As Ed introduced Johnny for the last time, his voice cracked. You could hear him fighting through the lump in his throat as he said, "Here's Johnny, one final time." The crowd roared, but Ed wasn't smiling. His eyes were red, his lips trembling. When Carson walked out, instead of heading to the desk, he stopped, turned to Ed, and hugged him tightly. It was long, unplanned, and heartbreakingly sincere. Two old friends saying goodbye not as showmen, but as brothers. During the monologue, Johnny's jokes faltered. He paused mid-sentence more than once, and the camera caught him blinking hard, trying to keep the tears back. At one point, he simply said, "I can't do this." In 30 years of broadcasting, Johnny Carson had never lost control of his stage. But that night, emotion conquered professionalism. And that made it perfect. Later, when the show cut to commercial, Carson turned to Ed and whispered something that microphones barely caught. "You were the best part of it." For millions watching, that goodbye felt like the end of an era, not just of a television show, but of an entire age of sincerity and loyalty on screen. 3. Bette Midler's farewell song. If Stewart's poem cracked the armor, Bette Midler shattered it. When Carson's retirement drew near, Celebrities lined up to say their goodbyes. But none did it with as much heart as Bette Midler. She walked onto the set in 1992 with her usual sparkle and mischief, but there was something different in her eyes. The weight of what was about to happen. She and Johnny reminisced about the old days, trading jokes and laughter. Then, in a quiet moment, she asked, "Would you like me to sing something for you?" Carson smiled, unaware he was about to experience one of the most emotional performances in television history. Bette began to sing One for My Baby and One More for the Road, the old Sinatra ballad about goodbyes and late nights. Her voice was low, intimate, almost trembling. By the time she reached the line, "It's 2:45, there's no one in the place except you and me," Johnny was gone. He leaned back in his chair, eyes wet, mouth trembling. Tears rolled silently down his cheeks as she sang directly to him. The audience could feel it, too, the sense that this was more than a performance. It was a farewell between two artists who understood each other's loneliness. When the song ended, Carson stood, took her hands, and whispered, "That was beautiful." The moment was so powerful that NBC replayed it repeatedly in its farewell specials. Even years later, Bette would say, "It wasn't an act. I could see his heart breaking." For Robin Williams, the laughter behind the pain. Few guests could light up Carson's stage like Robin Williams. His energy was pure chaos, a whirlwind of impressions, voices, and explosive humor. But behind that manic brilliance was a soul as fragile as it was gifted. When Robin appeared on The Tonight Show in the early 80s, Johnny could barely contain his laughter. He'd throw his cue cards, hold his face, even walk off the set just to compose himself. But there was one appearance that lingered differently. During a quieter segment, Carson asked Robin about fame, about what it was like to have the whole world laughing. Williams paused just for a second and said softly, "Sometimes it's the laughter that keeps you from falling apart." The audience chuckled nervously, unsure if he was joking, but Carson didn't laugh. He leaned forward, studied Robin's face, and nodded. It was a moment of silent understanding between two men who hid their pain behind humor. Later, when news of Robin's death broke years after Carson had passed, that clip resurfaced, and viewers realized just how much was unsaid in that brief exchange. Carson once told a friend after the taping, "There's a sadness in that man. I know that look." In his laughter, Johnny had seen a reflection of himself, the performer's paradox. How the funniest people often carry the heaviest hearts. 5. Sammy Davis Jr. Final appearance. By the late 1980s, Sammy Davis Jr. was a shadow of his former self. Cancer had ravaged his body, and his once mighty voice was fading. Still, he insisted on visiting The Tonight Show one last time. Carson welcomed him with warmth and respect, recalling decades of friendship and admiration. Sammy, frail but smiling, joked, "I'd hug you, Johnny, but I might fall apart." The crowd laughed, but the air in the studio felt heavy. You could sense everyone knew this might be goodbye. As they talked about the old days, the Rat Pack, Vegas, the civil rights years, Carson's eyes softened. Sammy's words slowed, his voice weak but steady. He reached across and took Johnny's hand, saying, "You were always fair to me, man. You treated me like a brother when it wasn't easy to do that on television." Carson didn't speak. He simply nodded, lips pressed tight. For the first time that night, his signature wit deserted him. When Sammy passed away the following year, Carson opened his monologue with a trembling voice. He was more than a guest, he said. He was part of this family. Then, for a full 10 seconds, he said nothing, just lowered his head, visibly emotional. That stillness said more than any punchline could. 6. Carol Burnett's surprise tribute. Carol Burnett was one of the few guests who could match Carson's wit beat for beat. She was playful, sharp, and unafraid to tease the king of late night. But her most memorable visit wasn't about comedy, it was about gratitude. In 1991, Carson had quietly paid for Burnett's close friend's medical bills after learning she couldn't afford treatment. He never mentioned it publicly. A year later, on his second-to-last show, Carol walked out carrying a single white rose. She thanked him, not for his help, but for the years of kindness he showed everyone behind the scenes. She ended by singing a soft verse of her show's closing song, "I'm so glad we had this time together." As the last note faded, Carson's eyes glistened. He smiled weakly and whispered, "You just broke me." It was pure Johnny, trying to deflect emotion with humor. But everyone could see it. The man who had made America laugh for 30 years was finally allowing himself to feel the goodbye. 7. The final monologue. I bid you a very sincere good night. May 22nd, 1992. After 4,531 episodes, the curtain was closing. No big guests, no flashy stunts, just Johnny, his desk, and an audience that couldn't stop crying. He opened the show with humility, thanking his viewers, crew, and writers. Every word felt final. His voice quivered slightly as he spoke of the years he'd shared with America. I can only tell you that it's been an honor and a privilege to come into your homes for 30 years. I bid you a very heartfelt good night. Then, without fanfare, the camera slowly pulled back. Carson turned toward the curtain one last time, nodded to Ed, and walked away. There was no applause line, no standing ovation. Just silence, a rare silence that felt sacred. As the credits rolled, the audience sat still, some openly weeping. NBC's cameras caught Ed McMahon dabbing his eyes. In the control room, even the crew couldn't speak. Johnny Carson, the man who never wanted to be caught crying, had said goodbye with the softest, most human gesture possible, a simple good night. It was a farewell that summed up his entire career. Understated, dignified, and heartbreakingly sincere. For years, people tried to understand Johnny Carson, the contradiction of the entertainer who lived for laughter but craved privacy. Friends described him as warm in private, but distant in public. He could make a room roar and then vanish into silence the moment the lights went off. Yet, in those rare moments of emotion, Jimmy Stewart's poem, Bette Midler's farewell, Ed McMahon's final introduction, we glimpse the truth. The humor wasn't armor, it was his language. The show wasn't just entertainment, it was how he connected with the world without revealing too much of himself. Carson once said, "I was happiest when I could make people laugh, and then leave before they found out I was human." But the world did find out, not through scandals or interviews, but through tears that slipped past his defenses on live television. Each of those moments lives on not because they showed Johnny Carson the star, but Johnny Carson the man. And maybe that's why, decades later, people still revisit those clips. Not for the jokes, not for the guests, but for the reminder that even legends are allowed to cry.